Thank you for joining us today. Tonight's meeting introductions will be offered in English and Spanish. Comments can be submitted in Spanish and will be translated after the session to ensure accuracy. Please know that this meeting is a public meeting and it is being recorded.
Gracias por estar con nosotros. Las presentaciones de la reunión se ofrecerán en inglés y español. Los comentarios se pueden enviar en español y se traducirán después de la sesión para garantizar la exactitud. Por favor, sepa que esta reunión es una reunión pública y está siendo grabada.
Good evening. My name is Quinn West Godwin from Governor Roy Cooper's Office of Public Engagement and Inclusion. On behalf of the 75th Governor of North Carolina, welcome to the Andrea Harris Task Force's Environmental Justice and Inclusion Subcommittee Listening Session. Members of the Andrea Harris Task Force and Environmental Justice and Inclusion Subcommittee members and staff were invited to listen to your comments and concerns. Although the members will not be providing responses or statements, they are here today to support the community.
Mi nombre es Quinn Godwin, de la Oficina de Participación Pública e Inclusión del Gobernador Cooper. En nombre del Gobernador 75 de Carolina del Norte, el Gobernador Roy Cooper, bienvenido a la sesión de escucha del Subcomité de Justicia e Inclusión Ambiental del Grupo de Trabajo Andrea Harris. Los miembros del Grupo de Trabajo Andrea Harris y los miembros y el personal del Subcomité de Justicia e Inclusión Ambiental fueron invitados a escuchar sus comentarios y preocupaciones. Aunque los miembros no proporcionarán respuestas o declaraciones, están aquí para apoyar a la comunidad.
Established under Executive Order 143, the Andrea Harris Social, Economic, Environmental, and Health Equity Task Force addresses the disparities in communities of color disproportionately impacted by COVID-19. The task force is named in honor of the late civil rights activist, Andrea Harris, who dedicated her life to eliminating disparities in North Carolina, co-founding the nonprofit Institute of Minority Economic Development, Durham, and serving on the state's Advisory Council for Historically Underutilized Businesses.
Establecido bajo la Orden Ejecutiva número 543, el Grupo de Trabajo de Equidad Social, Económica, Ambiental y de Salud de Andrea Harris aborda las disparidades en las comunidades de color afectadas desproporcionadamente por COVID-19. El grupo de trabajo lleva el nombre en honor a la fallecida activista de derechos civiles Andrea Harris, quien dedicó su vida a eliminar las disparidades en Carolina del Norte, confundando el Instituto de Desarrollo Económico de Minorías sin fines de lucro en Durham y sirviendo en el Consejo Asesor del Estado para empresas históricamente subutilizadas.
The task force is divided into 5 subcommittees. The Environmental Justice and Inclusion Subcommittee's specific charge includes 1. Considering environmental justice, equity, and inclusion to enhance public engagement and increase public participation by low-income minority communities in state decisions and actions. 2. Advancing sustainable economic and infrastructure recovery efforts for low-income, minority, and vulnerable communities. And 3. Encouraging and enhancing environmental justice, inclusion, and equity education.
El grupo de trabajo se divide en 5 subcomités. El cargo específico del Subcomité de Justicia e Inclusión Ambiental incluye considerar la justicia ambiental, la equidad y la inclusión para mejorar el compromiso público y aumentar la participación pública de las comunidades minoritarias de bajos ingresos en las decisiones y acciones estatales, promover esfuerzos sostenibles de recuperación económica y de infraestructura para las comunidades de bajos ingresos, minoritarias y vulnerables, y alentar y mejorar la educación en materia de justicia ambiental, inclusión y equidad.
I'd like to invite the chair of the Environmental Justice and Inclusion Subcommittee, Secretary Elizabeth Beiser, to say a few words.
Me gustaría
Thank you. On behalf of this subcommittee, I want to thank everyone for attending tonight and for sharing your perspectives on how we can work to ensure state government works equitably and effectively for all communities. We look forward to hearing your comments this evening. Thank you.
Buen, gracias. De parte de la subcomité, quiero agradecer a todos por asistir esta noche y por compartir sus perspectivas sobre cómo podemos trabajar para garantizar que nuestro gobierno estatal trabaje de manera equitativa y efectiva para todas las comunidades. Esperamos con interés escuchar sus comentarios esta noche. Gracias.
Thank you, Secretary Beiser. This listening session is in support of the subcommittee's long-term goal to support a legislative strategy to look at potential additions and changes to statutes and rules to incorporate environmental justice criteria into regulatory actions.
Gracias, Secretaria Beiser. Esta sesión de escucha es en apoyo del objetivo a largo plazo del subcomité de apoyar una estrategia legislativa para analizar posibles adiciones a los criterios de justicia ambiental en las acciones regulatorias.
Apologies, Carolina, you dropped out for a second there.
No
The
worries.
subcommittee members seek feedback from the public to further develop the recommendations. They have proposed a series of questions for public input on suggested changes, areas of priority, and the impacts you see in your communities. But your input is not limited to these topics. We look forward to hearing from you today.
Los miembros del subcomité solicitan comentarios públicos para desarrollar aún más la recomendación. Han propuesto una serie de preguntas para el aporte público sobre los cambios sugeridos, las áreas de prioridad y los impactos que ve en su comunidad. Por su aporte no se limita a estos temas. Esperamos con interés escuchar su punto de vista.
Everyone who is registered to speak will be given 3 minutes to provide comments. If you prefer to submit a written comment or your comment exceeds 3 minutes, you may submit it online, by phone, or mail. More information is available at the link below. If there is time left over, we will invite those who are not registered to participate.
Todos los que se hayan registrado para hablar tendrán 3 minutos para proporcionar comentarios. Si prefiere enviar un comentario por escrito o su comentario excede los 3 minutos, puede enviarlo en línea, por teléfono o por correo. Más información está disponible en la siguiente enlace. Si queda tiempo, invitaremos a participar a aquellos que no están registrados.
Hi, all. I'm Connor Kippy from Toxic Free NC. I'm the policy advocate at that organization. I just wanted to bring forward a couple of comments regarding specific areas that the Environmental Justice Subcommittee could put forward. Largely, these regard cumulative impact assessments that underlie the ability to see the impact of chemicals on different areas, and specifically the regulations regarding siting of chemical production companies in different areas. We at Toxic Free think that those regulations regarding cumulative impact assessments underlie the ability of the state to work on many of these other issues and prevent disproportionate harm to communities that are already experiencing other environmental health burdens. We would recommend that this subcommittee take those assessments forward and view that as one of the primary places in which the subcommittee could make recommendations around environmental justice going forward. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
My name is Mitchell Edwards, and I am the Economic and Workforce Development Chair of the NAACP Charlotte-Mecklenburg branch. And certain things I would like to have the committee look at would be one, just regulations, just well, one in the eastern part of the state concerning the CAPOs, the commercial animal feeding organizations. Most of the states CAFOs are located in Gulfin and Sampson counties, and those are predominantly areas of color. They have significant health issues as far as, there was a Duke study that was published in the NC Medical Journal and found that communities that were living by CAFOs had higher all-cause and infant death mortality rates. Also, they had more deaths suffering from anemia, kidney disease, and tuberculosis and sepsis as well. And also just the issue of waste, processing all of that, organic waste. Along with that, they found that the nitrogen had actually seeped into the water systems and into the riverways, so that there's an issue with water contamination as well. Also, it's just some reforms I would like to see would be maybe like tightening of the restrictions and the regulations. Also, I saw that in some of the laws that I had looked up the statutes that they're only required to be not investigated, but to be looked at least once a year. So I was thinking that maybe we could increase that to every quarter, to making sure that they're meeting that the state's regulations and requirements. And a lot of these statutes haven't been updated in the last 10 years. The last one I saw that was updated was maybe in 06 or 07. And then I would also like to look at, just for Charlotte as well, like infrastructure, like DC fast charging. I know that the state has a grant program as well, looking at corridors between population centers. But also, I'd also like to have DC fast charging and green charging, also for the city in general. I mean, if you don't know anything about Charlotte, it takes about a half an hour just to get from one side to the other. That's without traffic. Just that would also help, encourage Charlotte to meet their SEEP goals as well. Also, water quality in Charlotte. I looked at the water report, and we had at least 22 contaminants were found, and 12 actually exceeded the health standards. So maybe we could actually start diverting some more funding into looking at the quality of the water in Charlotte proper. There are some barriers of economic to economic participation. That would be just finding paths for direct employment for communities that are of color and that are historically disenfranchised. Also, zoning as well, like where these buildings are going up, gentrification as well, and also affordable childcare. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Mitchell. Next up, we have Will Hendrick.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Great. My name is Will Hendrick, and I'm an environmental justice advocate with the North Carolina Conservation Network. I have far more to say than I can fit into 3 minutes, so we'll plan to submit some comments in writing by the March 17th deadline. I want to first note the statement of interest, not only in a long-term goal of making legislative recommendations, but flagging the interest in rulemaking, because there's a difference between enactment and enforcement that I think is critical to observe and acknowledge here. Unfortunately, the only state law that currently references in the permitting context the imperative protection for communities of color or low income are protected by Title VI of the Solid Waste Management Act of 2007. It's been on the books for a long time. Never has a permit been denied on the basis of the cumulative impact of a proposed facility or its disproportionate adverse impact on surrounding communities. And I believe that there is a critical and existing statutory authority and opportunity for rulemaking to both codify the methods by which cumulative impacts are assessed and how disproportionate adverse impact on those protected communities is considered. Separate, I think, when we're talking about areas of North Carolina law that would benefit from amendment to advance causes of environmental justice, that we need look no farther than the bill filed by many North Carolina Democrats earlier this biennium. House Bill 784 referenced a number of different laws that could be changed to advance equity. It includes a primary focus on permitting, which I think is appropriate as a priority and an immediate focus for your recommendations. But it also talks about distinct aspects of permitting. Often the definition of environmental justice is contemplated as including both meaningful involvement and fair treatment. So it talks a little bit about meaningful involvement of community members, encouraging more time be provided. Community members are asked to provide input on a permit for a facility to be located in their community. But importantly, ensures that that's not just a temporal requirement, but an actual legal requirement for the hearing to occur. I do appreciate the efforts of DEQ to ensure, to the prior commenter's point, that hearings could be part of the process and the creation of the latest permit for CAFOs. But importantly, insufficient effort went into advocating for final decisions that can adequately protect those communities. And the bill that I referenced talks about permitting authority that would not only require consideration of cumulative impacts, but obligate the agency to deny permits where those cumulative impacts are disproportionately borne by communities of color. There are a number of other states that have taken action, beyond just proposing legislation. I would commend to you New Jersey's law, Senate Bill 232, enacted in 2020, Virginia's EJ Act, enacted in 2020, Senate Bill 406, Senate Bill 9 in Massachusetts, enacted last year, and a host of other examples that can be found on the website of the National Caucus of Environmental Legislators. The truth is, we don't really need new ideas. We need new political will to move them forward. I look forward to working with you to do just that, and we'll elaborate in our written comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Will. Next up, we have Sally McLean.
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Hello? Okay. I am Sally McLean, co-director of the Robeson County Cooperative for Sustainable Development. My comments today focus on cumulative impact and a role for the state in educating our local elected officials and county residents about the pollution in our communities. Many of our rural communities are overburdened with high levels of industrial pollution and low levels of health. Recent studies indicate that even low levels of air pollution and impact can impact health, public health. Cumulative impact needs to be recognized in the permitting process in our state. There needs to be a limit of total levels of pollution in the air, water, and soil in our rural counties. And when pollution reaches a certain point, and there's no new major sources of pollution are at that point permitted, then perhaps our elected officials will realize that our public health is worth more than just getting more and more major polluters in our midst. But cumulative impact also needs to be recognized in our state's obligation to inform our local communities and our local leaders of the types of levels of pollution in our counties. What companies have water and or air permits? Which companies are being responsible in complying with their permit agreements or which are not? We just had an important public hearing with DEQ this week on a major polluter here in Robeson County. If DEQ had come down here years ago and informed us of the problems that they were having with this company, we could have helped DEQ in pressuring them to be more responsible in complying with their permit. If they didn't do it for us, then we would have put pressure on them to shut down or stop harming both our environmental and public health. Finding these companies doesn't work. They make enough points from keeping their production high to pay what they are fined more than 10 times over. And I'm going to close with this. After Hurricane Florence, the Department of Environmental Quality teamed with other state agencies to hold a multi-county meetings on the impact of the climate crisis on our communities. DEQ needs to use that same model and inform us of the sources of pollution in our community and what they are doing right and wrong. Once we're informed and educated, our community members and officials can then work with state government and hold companies responsible to abide by their permits and conditions. I want to, at this point, thank you so much for hearing me, and have a good evening.
Okay, thank you, Sally. It's always great to hear somebody from my home county, Robeson County.
Well,
And next
right.
up we have, next up we have Will Hendrick.
I already spoke. I appreciate the opportunity, but don't want to deprive others of time. Thank you.
Okay. And lastly, and we'll come back to the names that we skipped, but we have Jennifer Roberts.
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Terrific. Buenas noches, gracias para escucharme. I'm going to speak in English, don't worry, but thanks so much for having me tonight. I'm Jennifer Roberts. I'm in Charlotte. I'm the former mayor of Charlotte, a former county commissioner. Great to see Secretary Beiser. Great to hear what you all are doing. I'm going to give a quick perspective. It was so great to hear Sally talk about education. We are doing a lot of work in Charlotte around climate justice and environmental justice, and we're finding that people don't understand what it's all about. planners, developers, elected officials, builders who don't know about clean construction techniques, but also about the fact that the urban heat islands are concentrated in parts of our city where we've had disinvestment and we don't have the green infrastructure. And so some of our parts of our city can be as much as 10 degrees hotter on a hot day. We know that gun violence can increase. We know that children don't learn as well. And so I echo Sally's words about education, community leaders, business leaders. It'd be great to have the state support more education about not just the impacts, but the solutions that are at hand and available. Also, the connection to our health. If you get the CDC, they have a wonderful website that's called Places. You can look at the Crescent in Charlotte, which is the east and west, the low-income areas, the Black and brown communities. The incidence of stroke, diabetes, asthma, so many of these chronic illnesses are much higher because these places have been disinvested. And there's so many solutions at hand. Electrifying school buses, which could reduce the pollution in those neighborhoods, more green infrastructure, heat mitigation, shade structures, energy burden, helping our households in low-income communities replace their appliances, weatherize, insulate their attics. We could have more workforce training because some of the folks in these neighborhoods could help their neighbors and be trained to do that. I think the state could have a great role there. Also on zoning and building codes, there are some restrictions on local governments are allowed to require, and any place that the state can allow local governments more flexibility would be terrific. We also know that health impacts are could be communicated to our doctors and nurses as well, so that they can talk about it with their community. But again, education is terrific, and thanks again for listening. And I may submit some comments in writing as well. I've been doing a lot of climate education around the state with Clean Air NC as well. So thanks for all you're doing. Thanks for hearing me tonight.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. At this time, we're going to go back to the top of the list for the people that we missed. So I'll start with Alana Dubeston.
Hi, my name is Tina Katsanos. I'm with the Charlotte-Mecklenburg NAACP. I'm the chair of the Climate Justice and Green Jobs Development Committee. I'm also with the North Carolina NAACP State Conference. I'm the chair of the Environmental Justice Committee. I'd like to speak in particular to the equity gaps in the area that I grew up in and still live in. That's in the Charlotte metro area. Charlotte is the largest city in the state of North Carolina and the most rapidly growing. We are currently experiencing dramatic changes in our economies and infrastructures. Unfortunately, the economic growth coupled with a population increase is benefiting the large corporations such as Duke Energy and Bank of America that are headquartered in Charlotte at the expense of long-established Black and brown communities. We are facing an affordable housing crisis due to gentrification, which is spilling into nearby towns in Mecklenburg County. Towns like Davidson and Huntersville, where historic Black communities are facing the imminent threat of displacement, just as they are in Charlotte. The Charlotte metro area is in desperate need of job creation for its historic Black and brown communities. At the NAACP, we believe that workforce development should be rooted in new green economies. We are asking your agency to use Governor Roy Cooper's Executive Order 246 as the primary lens to consider any future policymaking and agency decisions, policies and decisions which would dictate the futures of our historically Black and brown communities. We witnessed the devastation of the thriving African-American community, Brooklyn, here in Charlotte, a community that the city was able to demolish under the false pretense of urban renewal, a community that was unable to engage in self-determination because of the legacy of racial discrimination, in particular through the practice of redlining. We are in a unique moment in time. Some sort of Green New Deal, perhaps in pieces, will undoubtedly happen. The climate crisis is now dictating our futures. Our hope is that the state of North Carolina will support the creation of green workforce development, which prioritizes historically marginalized communities, the same communities which were largely ignored during Roosevelt's New Deal. We hope that the state of North Carolina will seriously and authentically prioritize our Black and Brown neighbors whose stories are rooted in ancestral histories that inhabit local spaces in Charlotte and Mecklenburg County. And of course, this is true throughout the state. Supporting and investing in green workforce development, supporting and investing community solar, supporting and investing in land trusts. This will amount to true equity, especially as we know that the people that shoulder the burden of climate change are Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities, the very communities that have contributed the least. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Tina.
Thank you to the committee for having this meeting tonight. I don't have 3 minutes of comment, but I do want to make a few comments. I'm speaking tonight on behalf of the Environmental Justice Community Action Network, which is an organization here in Sampson County, North Carolina. I am first concerned at the way that this meeting was announced or announced to the community with only 10 days or less than 10 days notice. It's very difficult for community members, particularly in rural parts of the state, to be able to adequately notify and prepare people to participate in such an opportunity. That raises a real concern for me, considering the communities have said more times than I can count that it's important for adequate notice. This was not adequate notice. I'm further concerned because I knew Andrea Harris and the advocate that she was. I'm sure that she would not feel that this opportunity is representative of what she would have wanted communities to have been able to participate in and to allow them adequate time to prepare. I'm also concerned about the process so far because this is the Andrea Harris Task Force was announced almost 2 years ago. And when it was announced, there were to be several stakeholder meetings to allow communities to be able to provide feedback. Here we are almost at the end of the executive order, and this is the only opportunity for communities to be able to speak. I'm very concerned that this again is just another slap in the face, another check the box for local communities, for rural communities, and probably part of the reason why there's not better participation on this call tonight. Environmental justice means meaningful engagement. This is not meaningful engagement. This is not an opportunity to allow these community folk to be able to have their say or to believe that what they say is going to be listened to, which is the pattern that we have seen over and over and over again. I hope that in the future that there will be actually an opportunity or an effort on the part of the state to provide adequate notification in advance to allow communities to be prepared to participate in such important opportunities and not continue to check the box. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Sherry. It looks like our next participant is a call-in user. It's 919-801.
Hi, this is Chandra Taylor. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
So my name is Chandra Taylor Sawyer. I'm a senior attorney at Southern Environmental Law Center, and I lead our environmental justice initiative. I am calling in to make two suggestions. First, as to the issue of priorities, I think that many of us know that the environmental harms that communities of color and low-wealth communities face are symptoms of the problem of political disempowerment and economic disempowerment. So we can't not treat the symptoms of the overall problem, and I do echo the statement that I've heard before, particularly with that you've heard before on this call, particularly with regard to the need of our state to have more statutes that are like our Solid Waste Management Act that would require denying a permit if it's shown that the cumulative impact of that permit, along with other similar polluting facilities nearby, will have a disproportionate adverse impact on communities of color and low wealth communities. There has to be that type of permit denial authority in place to really get at these environmental harms that many of us spend quite a bit of time putting out fires of all of these different new polluting facilities that pop up, or dealing with cleanup of existing facilities. Then there's the issue of rectifying political disempowerment and economic disempowerment. And I think that another place to consider in prioritization is to look to the Federal Justice 40 Initiative and their guidance on setting out, who are disadvantaged communities, and being very intentional about directing economic resources to those areas that are most economically disempowered, like that real direction of resources. So we don't know how Justice 40 is going to play itself out, but I do think it's a good place to look to rectify that really systemic harm. And also another area of focus that I would hope that our state government level municipalities would look to is to decide to put more emphasis on gathering information from the communities that many social service, so there are Department of Health and Human Services, there are people who already receive services from the government that we know those people have less financial resources. Asking direct questions of those communities in direct outreach, where there are already opportunities for contact with people to ask what the most important environmental issues are to them. I think that type of direct outreach can be even more powerful to hear from people exactly what they'd like to see. And I appreciate this opportunity to speak with you all via phone, but I really would hope that there's more of our government resources put into, some real get out, knock on doors, or when people are coming in for services to ask about these additional questions of environmental harm, so that people can say what type of amenities they would like to see, what types of health concerns they have, maybe if it's even with regard to additional emissions from transportation, or a desire for more public transportation, whatever those issues are that people are facing, and they want to talk about them. If there's a touch point with people who are working in our government, I think that's another opportunity to collect that information directly from the source, and then be really more effective in providing the needs as they are stated by all of our communities across the state who don't have as much money, and people of color. Thank you so much for listening and allowing me to speak.
Thank you so much. And it's Brianna, right? Can you give us your last name again?
Oh, my first name is Chandra,
okay.
Chandra. I'm sorry, and my last name is Taylor-Sawyer.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And next up, we have Kathy Ann Buckley.
My name is Kathy Buckley, and I am staff to the North Carolina Alliance to Protect Our People and the Places We Live. First of all, I wanted to say thank you for having this listening session, and also that I agree with all the comments that have been made so far. I haven't heard anything that I don't agree with. I also attended the North Carolina Renewable Power hearing on Monday night, and I'll tell you, if North Carolina grants that permit, then I think that it's pretty clear that North Carolina really doesn't care about their people, because what that's doing to the community is horrific. And I've also attended many, and last Monday, of the 32 who spoke, 32 were opposed to it. But that seems to happen at all the hearings. There's so many people are opposed and have concerns, and then DEQ just issues the permit. I'm sorry, I live near the train line, so you may hear a train in the background. And you know, DEQ does research before these hearings to find out what kind of communities are being affected. And the only thing they say is the proponent needs to make sure that the communities are informed. And that's not a very high bar, but even then it's not done. And I've even been to hearings where the town itself that the facility was located in didn't know about it. And there seems to be no effort by DEQ to make sure that communication is taking place. Finally, I just want to say that you know, with climate change, there are going to be health effects. You know, I'm not surprised to find out that in EJ communities, stroke and heart attack is higher because my son ran into someone who's doing research on the effect of heat on those diseases, and you know, there's a correlation. And as the nighttime temperatures get higher, or stay higher, actually, you know, just don't go down as much, there's going to be more of that. And it's you know, it's not something that you want to wish on somebody. So I just wish that that the words of Governor Cooper in Executive Order 246 actually be adhered to. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. Next, we have Liv Hutchby.
What I really appreciate is the opportunity for this listening session. There are very detailed ways that over a period of 15 or 20 years of my experience in environmental justice efforts, especially, I actually have a very emotional stories that you probably have already heard, but I want to remind you of one that's most recent. In the planning for the LNG facility in Robeson County, there was no acknowledgement of the Lumbee artifacts. It is my understanding that I am not Lumbee. I'm telling you what I heard had happened. That the company simply went in, cleared the trees, dug up the ground in preparation for this facility, and then, oh my goodness, we have artifacts. Oh, well, we're sorry we have these now that we've destroyed half of it. I mean, it was so emotional, and the cultures that have been not just distracted and not just confused, they have literally had destruction to their cultures because of the inattention of regulators and requiring environmental impact statements ahead of time. There must not ever be the opportunity for an ACP, that is Atlantic Coast Pipeline type company, to come in and do this sort of tree cutting and all of this that destroys land and destroys family. And so this is part of what I've experienced. Also, the loss of friends to cancer because they happen to live near CAFOs or coal ash. And so I've heard tonight people speak directly to the issue of the health and education, climate change. And I would also say, because I live in Orange County, you know that in Chapel Hill, a police station is built over the coal ash. And we've struggled here now because Duke Energy has not changed its coal-fired plant. It is unthinkable that in 2022, we would have to have citizens who are almost 80 years old out in the streets trying to fight for the life of the future of North Carolinians. I was born and reared here, and I love North Carolina, and I want to make sure that if my grandchildren can have clean water and clean air, that it will happen. And you have been so kind tonight to listen to professionals, to people like myself. I actually am a member of Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, and I feel that this is a peace issue because we have created conflict in our
Ms. Liv, I'm sorry to have to interrupt you, but we're well past our 3 minutes. If you have any other comments you want to say, you can submit those after the meeting, either via email.
Thank you, Mr. Young.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And Evan, you can double check for me, but I don't see any other hands raised.
Yeah, I also do not see any additional hands.
Just to make sure all hearts and minds are clear. Now's your last chance. Okay. Thank you for participating in our listening session today and offering your honest feedback and guidance on environmental justice in North Carolina.
Gracias por participar en nuestra sesión de escucha y ofrecer sus comentarios honestos y orientación sobre la justicia ambiental en Carolina del Norte.
We will have your comments transcribed and will use them to further the mission of the Andrea Harris Task Force. Please remember that you can continue to submit your comments through March 17th as detailed on the DOA website. And thank you for all of our presenters and all of our commentators today, and have a great evening.
Haremos transcribir sus comentarios y los utilizaremos para promover la misión del Grupo de Trabajo Andrea Harris. Recuerde que puede continuar enviando comentarios hasta el 17 de marzo, como se detalla en el sitio web del Departamento de Administración. Gracias a todos los participantes y que tengan una linda noche.